Welcome back. I'm Maciel, and I'm reading from my book, The Five Vows. Chapter 6, The Vow of Purity. The troposphere is that part of the Earth's atmosphere that lies closest to the surface of the planet. It's usually about 11 miles thick, a little more at the equator, and substantially less at the poles. From space, it looks like a gray haze, especially when seen from the side, due to the turbulence caused by the friction between it and the ground. Air mixed with dirt, air mixed with water, air mixed with pollution. The troposphere forms a heavy blanket over everything. It is where we live. Alchemically, air symbolizes mind, and it is remarkable how similar our minds are to the strata of air that form the Earth's atmosphere. If we could see ourselves the way we see the Earth from space, we would see the same kind of gray haze, the same zone of turbulence, the same mixtures of different elements. Water for emotion, earth for materiality, fire for impulsiveness, all these forming our own personal atmosphere, pressing down upon our awareness and creating the lens through which we perceive and interpret our world. As with all of the five vows, the vow of purity is a tool that helps clarify our consciousness. It helps us move past the entropy of self-absorption and toward a clear vision of God. As a blessing administered by one who has himself or herself attained the reality of clear sight, the vow of purity is a taste, a scent of the possibility of something greater than our earthly identity, a wider and deeper reality of life that lies just beyond the boundary of self-involvement that surrounds us like a layer of fog. Once introduced to that reality, we then have something to shoot for, a ray of hope, the certain knowledge that the sun is indeed shining, in fact is always shining, just above the clouds. Earth life by its very nature is a turbulent affair, and so we come to regard it as an obstacle to our peace of mind and clarity of vision. In a Buddhist analogy for meditation, the mind in its normal state of worldly involvement is seen as a pool of water that is constantly agitated by our ceaseless thinking and is therefore laden with disturbed sediment. Meditation quiets the mind, letting the suspended particles settle to the bottom, restoring the water to its pristine state. The sunlight can then pass through it unimpeded, and the mind becomes illumined. While the turbulence of our earthly existence seems to get in the way of our spiritual development, it is a mistake to regard it as impure. It's not that the earth is impure, it is simply the earth. It is what it is, neither pure nor impure, good nor bad. To shun it, or worse yet, to despise it as misguided or despising is as misguided as despising one's own body. Nothing but suffering can come of that. But to regard the earth as the entirety of one's being is equally misguided and can cause tremendous suffering to the soul. The vow of purity is a way to see past the veil of materiality. It enables us to see the brilliant luminosity of the great sphere of being that we also inhabit, just as surely as we inhabit the dusty, turbulent environment of life on this planet. Earth clings to itself. It has a kind of static electric charge, spiritually speaking, that makes everything earthy, including earthly thoughts, cohere into a mass of, dirt. Inherent within that clump, however, is the possibility for all life and self-expression. But without a connection to the clear, expansive amniotic field of sunlight within which it exists, Earth is entirely inert, no possibility for anything. In order to realize the full spectrum of life, a connection has to be made. That greater reality is the source of all power. No animation can exist without it. Far from obliterating all things familiar, however, this pure energy brings life to what would otherwise be dead. The vow of purity is a way to harmonize one's thinking and way of being with that greater reality, and thus bring about a fuller, more conscious spiritual life. Purity of mind. All of the vows point to high spiritual states of consciousness, states of mind and heart that transcend the physical body of flesh. What begins in the mind eventually works its way into the heart, and out of the heart proceeds action. When we try to bypass the heart and go straight from idea to action by way of will, darkness creeps in, and the heart recedes into the distance. This leaves a new entity, a dweller, parked on the boundary between our inner and outer worlds. The dweller is the pent-up energy that we are afraid to express. It looks like a devil, figuratively speaking, but it is really the life energy itself wearing a demon's mask. The mask is composed of our fears, and it mirrors those fears back to us. Depending on the strength of the life energy's head of steam, the build-up behind the mask, the evil we see there can appear huge. But it's only the mask powered by the life energy behind it. There is nothing wrong with the life energy itself. It is pure. It is good. It is holy. It is only the demon mask, a mask that we ourselves created, that makes it feel otherwise. If we try to use our vows as a weapon against the dweller and its demon mask, as a means to repress it, then we create a state of enmity between it and us. This is the worst possible use of the vows, because it puts us at enmity with our own life force. Nothing good can ever come of that. It would be better to live our life as a libertine than to be constantly at war with ourselves. No one is served when the object of life is to keep our foot on the throat of our own vitality. Being an inner phenomenon, we mistake the dweller as our true nature, an unbridled, murderous, and rapacious lizard self, and we resist it with our willpower. This only seems to work, and then only for a short while, until it bursts in upon us and eats us alive, destroying the fortress we have so carefully built to defend against it. Instead of a tree of life, our spinal cord becomes a snake, always slithering downwards, like lightning seeking the ground. But this is only because the heart has gone unattended. When our desire for knowledge supersedes our desire for feeling, when high touch loses to high tech, then our moral sense gets lopsided. Brute strength becomes the ideal, and our conscience is pushed into the background. Everyone loses in the end. The vow of purity gives us the extra energy we need in order to plug into the higher strata of mind through meditation. The lower stratum is the mass mind, which is mostly concerned with life on earth and the desires and fears that go along with it. The vow of purity helps us to identify with God's mind rather than the limited day-to-day way of thinking that predominates in normal life. When we take the vow of purity, we formalize our intention to seek that higher consciousness. The act of seeking it draws to us the grace we need in order to realize it. Grace is the deciding factor here. The whole idea of grace is that we don't do it ourselves. We don't attain purity by our own efforts. When we take the vow of purity, it opens a doorway, a portal into that area of the mind of God that articulates the principle of purity. It acts upon us from the inside out. We meditate on the aspect, and then we go about our lives. The vow is like an object on the spiritual plane, a thing that we can hold up to the source of all life, through which that energy will filter, shining its light upon us and lifting our consciousness high enough so that we can comprehend purity at its own level, This is what grace does. It is by grace that the heart is awakened from its matter-induced coma and once again takes up its position alongside the rational mind as that arbiter of truth. It is the heart that moderates the power of knowledge by giving it direction and wisdom. It alone can face down the demon mask of the life force and soothe the savage beast. The pent-up energy behind the demon mask is rerouted, given a higher object of desire, and by degree made nobler in its pursuits. The will we pretend to use against the demon mask is a mental construct, a mock willpower fueled only by the ego. Since the will and the life force are one and the same, force of will cannot bring about the change because the life force cannot self-destruct. In Western mythology, dragons symbolize the demon mask. When a dragon is slain, the slayer eats its heart and drinks its blood, thus incorporating its vital energies. Only the outer form of the dragon is killed, thus releasing the vital energies it held captive. As the grace of purity transforms us, our mind becomes clearer and our thoughts become more sharply defined. Such thoughts are powerful and have the ability to transform our lives. So we can say that purity is the ability to think in a consistent way, to think thoughts that are unadulterated by opposing thoughts. This does not mean that we have to be closed-minded or dogmatic in our thinking. Instead, it means that we learn to use our thoughts as tools with which to fashion the outer circumstances of our lives in ways that are consistent with our ideals. It's not that we shouldn't entertain opposing viewpoints, it's that we don't, at least not when the chips are down. When we understand the component parts of mind, we begin to see how thinking is the act of deliberately combining concepts in such a way that they attune our awareness with divine ideas. The vow of purity empowers us to see this inner dynamic of mind more easily. Once we see how the mind works, we can better use it to our advantage. Otherwise, contradictory thoughts dominate our awareness and adulterate the attunement we are trying to establish. Divine ideas are constructs in the universal mind. Our brains tune into them in much the same way that a radio tunes into a radio station through a process of attunement. Concepts are the individual building blocks of ideas. For example, good is a concept, and so is work, or effort. Put the two concepts together, and you have the idea that hard work will bring success. Worthiness is also a concept. When we combine it with our self-image, then hard work tends to take a back seat, and success comes to us with little or no effort on our part. We are lucky. Purity versus purist. Purity is a matter of consistency. A pure substance is one that consists of one material only, such as pure gold. An impure substance is one that has been adulterated by the addition of one or more foreign materials. It's not that one material is good and the other bad, it's that putting the two together compromises their individual integrity. It alters their individual characteristics. Depending on what you're using the material for, its purity can be very important. At the same time, the substance of our lives is rarely pure, neither should it be. Pure gold, for instance, is impractical for use as jewelry. It's too soft. So we add other elements to it to make it harder. This is called an alloy. Similarly, the ideas that form the basis of our individualized thinking are usually mixtures of related concepts. These mixtures make our personal ideology or worldview more adaptable to our life's circumstances. Whether better strength or a difference in color, the particular mixtures we cultivate make our individual life unique. A friend whose mixtures are similar to ours, we call an ally, a word curiously similar to alloy. When we understand purity in this way, we can avoid the unbalanced worldview of the purist mentality. Purists are often obsessed with their own ideas of the world and humanity's place in it. They will gladly sacrifice reason to dogma, curiosity to greed, and diversity to a monolithic sameness. The vow of purity was never intended to support such a stultifying mindset. Rather, it is a means to an end, a way to focus the mind. Purity allows the mind to play the alchemist, combining ideas in new ways so as to expand consciousness, not restrict it. The purpose of purity is not conformity. The main goal of purity is not to conserve already existing ideas as though healthy exploration of greater possibilities were somehow impure. Viewing it in this way only robs us of a powerful tool of mind. It is the trajectory of our curiosity that must remain pure. We must not seek only those ideas that will satisfy our preconceived expectations. Instead, we must be chaste to the truth, accepting whatever it may be, taking it in at whatever level we are capable of comprehending it. Adopting another's grasp of the truth as though it were our own, without first testing it and integrating the results of our tests into the fabric of our being, is an adulteration. For no idea, no matter how true it may seem, is true for us if we do not arrive at it by the fruits of our own labor. Purity in speech. Most people think that purity of speech means no swearing. Perhaps it could mean always telling the truth, to refrain from lying, or maybe it means to speak positively, to avoid gossip or spiteful criticism of others. Of course, purity of speech could mean any of these things, but these examples are essentially moralistic in nature, which is not the best way to access the real power of a principle. This is because morals are largely cultural and can differ widely from one group mind to another. If we take as our primary definition of purity as pure substance without the addition of lesser or inferior substances, then purity of speech means speaking without equivocation. Anytime we add one substance to another, we obscure the original substance. We reduce its clarity. Clarity is the key word of the principle of purity. When we use obfuscation in order to hide the true meaning of our words, we violate the principle of purity in our speech. Here again, we see where purity is an aspect of humility, because in order to speak clearly, we have to tune in to the way the other person is hearing us. We have to be aware of our audience, what it is capable of understanding, and speak accordingly. We have to take our attention off of ourselves and put it on the other person. By doing this, we place more importance on their understanding than we do on our being understood, on communication itself, rather than the satisfaction of self-expression. Our goal is to be heard rather than to simply spout off. Pure speech also means that we strive to serve the needs of the person to whom we are speaking. We want our words to be helpful, to do no harm. If we intend our words to hurt the other person, we are mixing them with anger. Our words become a weapon and not a means of communication at all. Since the purpose of speech is communication, trying to hurt the other person with our words is to adulterate our speech, to use it for a purpose for which it was never intended. Communication is, by its very nature, a two-way street, a give and take of ideas and feelings. To use our speech as a weapon, thinking that we are communicating harm, is to invite retaliation, thereby negating any service to ourselves. Words spoken in anger can only lead to our own undoing. Deception is another misuse of speech. By misuse, I don't mean that it is speech misapplied, but that it is the attempt to use speech in a way that subverts the purpose for which it was created. Speech is the physical manifestation of the principle of communication. And since communication is the means by which ideas and feelings are shared, lying is the act of withholding. It is not sharing at all. It is offering a counterfeit in place of the genuine article, and is thus an adulteration. It is disingenuous, which means not genuine. The lack of clarity in speech is usually indicative of deception, as in the fine print of an insurance policy. Insurance companies profit immensely by dissimulation, by making their policies so hard to understand that it is nearly impossible to determine which events are covered and which are not. Such practices undermine the principle upon which the concept of insurance is founded: the shared financial risk amongst a group of people in the event of an individual's need. Dissimulation destroys trust, the very foundation of civil society. Take it away and communication is compromised. No sane person will open up to another person if they think they're going to get hurt. We become overly guarded in our interactions, separating ourselves from our fellow human beings. This prevents cooperation, which is dependent on trust. Of all the ways in which we can apply the principle of purity in our everyday lives, the most important is purity of speech. Why? Because purity of speech is all about telling the truth. And as we all know from experience, telling the truth changes everything. Telling the truth is the most powerful tool we have in creating the world we live in. If we are continually trying to hide the truth from those around us or from ourselves, we are out of accord with the principle of purity. This destroys the clarity of our thoughts and speech. To know the truth, we must be willing to speak the truth. A word about swearing. Rarely in everyday speech does the F word mean sexual intercourse. Normally, it's used as a way to add emphasis to what we are saying. I'm using this particular word because it epitomizes the notion of swearing or vulgar language in most cultures. If this word were merely slang for sex, then it would not constitute impure speech. Slang is not a form of lying, nor is it intended to obscure meaning. On the contrary, we use it to improve clarity. When we properly use profanity as a tool, it can jar our listeners out of their assumptions about what we're saying and force them to reassess our ideas. But as a form of speech, profanity loses its effectiveness if it is overused. In this way, it can get in the way of clarity and thus become impure speech. So we don't have to get hung up about swearing or think that if we omit swear words from our vocabulary, that our speech is automatically pure. If it is purity of speech that we aspire to, then we must work on omitting equivocation, dissimulation, and all other forms of lying. Action, simplicity, and sex. Purity of speech strives for clarity. We say what we mean, and we mean what we say. Purity of speech is being concise in our use of words. It means that we practice communication in the way it was intended, accurately conveying our ideas and feelings without contradiction and with a high degree of simplicity. So it is with our actions. Purity of action means that we do those things that are consistent with our goals. It means refraining from acting in ways that contradict our work against what we are trying to accomplish, that contradict or work against what we are trying to accomplish in our life. The transcendentalist philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Your actions speak so loudly that I can't hear a word you say." If we fail to align our actions and our words, we are not living in accord with the principle of purity. Simplicity is subjective. What is simple for one person may not be simple for another. We all differ in our ability to keep multiple balls in the air. As long as the overall goal of our life is consistent, then it doesn't matter how much we have going on. It only matters that one part does not subvert any of the others. If our lives become overly complicated, then it starts to show. In this way, purity equates to focus. Our actions must be in integrity with our goals. Without focus, purity cannot exist. We must be able to clear our personal energy field and decide which vibrations we will radiate. When the vibrations we emit are consistent with each other, they reinforce each other. If they are not consistent, they cancel each other out. A pure signal, therefore, is a strong signal. Purity means one thing unadulterated by something else. But if two things are combined for a purpose, as in the previous example of adding two metals together to form an alloy, that's different. It is possible, for example, to have pure brass, even though brass is a combination of zinc and copper. It is possible to have a democratic republic, even though one term means rule by the people and the other means government by representation. The intended use of such combinations is clear, and as long as clarity is served, there is purity. Anytime we use words such as pure, clean, elegant, simple, or modest, the principle of purity is at work. Simple truth, elegant writing, elegant design, modest speech, a clean cut, all of these terms denote clarity and simplicity. Modesty, for example, is the opposite of showiness. Modest speech lacks excessive hyperbole. It seeks clarity and communication. It does not try to impress. In surgery, a clean cut is a precise incision, one that is in the right place and neither too big nor too small. In hunting, a precise shot makes for a clean kill, as opposed to merely wounding the animal and prolonging its suffering. In a military strike, it means little or no collateral damage. Blessed are the pure in heart. A pure heart is a heart devoid of hatred. How do we purge our heart of hatred? By praying for our enemy's happiness. We pray for him as though we had no prior relationship with him, as though we were completely objective. This separates us from what happened, the violation or the transgression, and changes the polarity of our thoughts and feelings, thus cleansing our heart of anger and fear. When our heart is pure, we realize our oneness with the other person. We see God. As in the theme of the movie Ender's Game, the more you know your enemy, the more you love him. Sexuality. Purity has little to do with sexual desire. Sex is natural and good. But in order for it to be pure, it must be consensual. Feelings of being used can only happen when one person has different expectations about the outcome, in which case the sex could hardly be called consensual. In order for consensus to exist, there must be clear communication, no dissimulation or manipulation. It's only when sex adulterates the other person's relationship with others, or it adulterates your relationship with others, that it violates the principle of purity. Chronic or habitual promiscuity is always harmful in the long run. Because of the psychic ties created in sex, multiple partners can cause confusion of one's vital energies. There are too many incoming signals, which leads to an inability to sort out one's own feelings and thoughts from those of his or her multiple partners. Here's the main thing we should consider. Sex is powerful. It creates changes in our energetic fields, the addition of vibrations that are not our own. This by itself can interfere with our clarity. Unless we are in a committed relationship with one other person, one with whom we are spiritually compatible, meaning that we harmonize energetically, we would be better off if we avoided sex altogether, if we are on the spiritual path. Once we are clear about who and what we are, then being in a committed relationship with someone of similar consciousness can be a wonderful experience and a tremendous help. Purity and gender. It would be great if we could pluck the diamond of truth about purity right out of the ground, perfectly cut and polished, but this gem is buried deep in semantic rubble. It's going to require a bit of excavating and refining before its true meaning can be revealed. The hard fact is that the word purity, in its spiritual connotation, has been sexualized. In its narrowest interpretation, it means no sex. But this is only because sex can make people irrational, and the authors of the no sex rule didn't like that. Sex is disorderly and unpredictable, which makes it difficult for the thinking mind to control. And the rational mind, and those who swear by it, is all about control. Sexual activity is fiercely regulated in all human societies. There are strict rules about how individuals should behave. After all, the physical life of the tribe depends on it, and the orderly function of its society requires strict genealogical integrity. Property rights and inheritance rights all depend on unambiguous lineages. But strangely, the rules governing such things have been made highly gender-specific. They not only define appropriate sexual behavior, they also define appropriate moral character, specifying different codes for men and women. The principle of purity has been feminized, as though it were the exclusive province, morally speaking, of women. And the moral obligation imposed on women is severe. Even an accusation of impurity can get a woman killed in some societies, or at the very least stigmatized. Perhaps this bias towards women is due to the civic concerns listed above, those of property and inheritance, or maybe the causes run deeper, much deeper, in the primal needs of a child for the exclusive devotion of the mother. Since most people, men especially, feel slighted from the earliest age in this department, always blame it on the mother, keeping her affections well regulated would seem to work to everyone's advantage, tribally speaking. Perhaps this is why love and affection are considered primarily feminine virtues. A warm and nurturing heart is essential to child-rearing and thus essential to the survival of a people. Therefore, feminine purity is seen as the capacity to hold a space for others wherein they can grow and develop. A woman with a cold heart, however, one who has lost her capacity to empathize due to bitterness, stunted emotional development, or is simply corrupted by power, somehow loses her feminine purity and thus loses her moral legitimacy. I could, at a point where it seems necessary to broach the subject of male purity, insert the word oxymoron. Somehow the words male and pure just don't fit well in the same sentence, as though they had no linguistic connection. But since warmth and affection have been commonly considered to be aspects of the heart, and since these qualities have already been exclusively reserved for women, some other heart aspect has to be claimed for men. That aspect is courage. After all, men needed some kind of outlet for their feelings that would allow them not to be women. The only acceptable use of the word cry when in the same sentence as man is in the words battle cry. War, it seems, and perhaps football, is the only legitimate way for men to fully express their feelings. This is changing, of course, but all of the gains men have made in discovering their inner tender mercies could be obliterated by a single call to another world war. Courage, therefore, is considered almost exclusively a male virtue. Men are also counted on to sacrifice themselves for the good of the tribe, but in outwardly directed ways. Courageous men are decorated as heroes. They can kill other men without letting their feelings get in the way, as long as they commit their crimes in socially sanctioned venues such as war and criminal justice. Their ability to compartmentalize their feelings is lauded as manly behavior, sexualized again in the vernacular by a reference to the male genitalia. If a man is unable to control his emotions, it means that he is weak, or worse yet, womanly. The usual descriptor is wussy, or another word that rhymes with that, which further reinforces the way society genderizes moral principles. And like a woman's impurity, which is the corruption of the feminine heart aspect as it is socially understood, can get her killed, so can cowardice be grounds to execute a man, especially in times of war. All of these conditioned ideas about purity only get in the way. They tell us little about purity as a spiritual principle, but this is nothing new. Powerful emotions have always been stigmatized in our society, and when purity is semantically linked to sex to the point where that is all that it means, people will go out of their way to get dirty. Chastity as fidelity. The question often comes up, what is the difference between purity and chastity? Sometimes the two words are used interchangeably. A vow of purity is a vow of chastity, and vice versa. But there is a difference. Whereas purity is the state of unconflicted thinking, the tailoring of concepts that will best attune us with divine ideas, chastity is the commitment to keeping those ideas intact. Chastity is fidelity. We might say that purity is a quality of thinking and chastity is a matter of the heart. When we truly attain to the quality of chastity, we no longer want to entertain concepts that will attune us with anything less than divine ideas. Ordinary ideas that have mostly to do with mundane life become infused with higher purpose. The desire for a nice home, for example, becomes an expression of harmony and nurturance, a place in which to foster new life and to provide the substance to maintain it. But if those ideals are compromised by the desire to create an image of success and wealth, an idea composed of concepts that are ego-driven and not divine in nature, then we have chosen to be loyal to the mass mind and not the mind of God. The vow of chastity is a kind of upgrade of the vow of purity. We commit ourselves to be loyal, to be true to God above all else, and through our commitment pours the grace that empowers us to fulfill our commitment. Chastity doesn't replace purity, it raises it to a higher level. Whereas purity brings us into the consciousness of mental clarity, chastity integrates that into our desire nature, transforming it into a one-pointed orientation toward God. In effect, we marry ourselves to God and pledge our fidelity to the divine. Chastity does not preclude romantic love, but it does place our relationship to God above our relationship to another person. Practically speaking, our human relationships are temporary, whereas our relationship to God is eternal. Chastity does, however, form the perfect bedrock for a marriage, because if we place our own relationship to God first, we must also allow the same for our partner. The marriage vow is thus a contract for spiritual freedom, not subservience. Chastity recognizes that God is the source of all life and power. It also recognizes that mind is a spectrum that stretches from the most mundane animal consciousness to the most rarefied divine consciousness. It recognizes that life is a force, an energy that pours out of the mind regardless of which part of the spectrum we plug into. The closer in attunement that mind is to the mundane, the more confused it becomes, the more contradictory the ideas are to each other, because life on earth requires diversity. Again, one part is not better than another, only different. If our goal is to embrace a more universal and therefore harmonious experience of life, then a steadfast loyalty to the highest conception of reality becomes essential. Unless we are faithful in our striving to achieve that goal, the entropy of the mass mind will pull us down to its level every time. There is nothing wrong with life in the world. In fact, the world runs according to the same principles as those of the vows, only in the world they are called promises. In the highest offices of government service, for instance, we promise to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. This is a high and noble purpose in the world. But for those who seek God, this kind of promise is insufficient. The laws of man are always subject to the laws of God. The two domains need not conflict with each other, but when they do, we look to divine principle to sort out the difference. When it comes to God's law versus human law, the final arbiter of truth is one's own conscience. This is the voice of God for each person, and it is this that the vow of chastity empowers us to hear. Individual conscience becomes the highest law of the land. This is the basis of the rights of the individual enshrined in Western culture. It is also the basis of the moral imperative of civil disobedience, when the laws of government contradict an individual's moral conscience. In the social arena, it is the proper role of religion to help people get in touch with their conscience and to provide them with the moral support to stand by it. Ideally, the ability of a religion to provide moral leadership should be based upon the combined wisdom of the ages, accepted over time by careful consideration and testing. Until we are spiritually mature enough to hear and respond to our own conscience, religion can point the way. But the goal should always be to help us develop our own moral compass, not one prescribed by others. Until we can act in accordance with our own conscience of our own free will, without having to be prompted by others, we cannot evolve spiritually. Spiritual growth can only come as a result of the choices we make, not the ones made for us. Remember, the power of a vow lies in this principle. As we move towards God, God moves towards us. When we make the commitment to be faithful to God, to be true as in fidelity, God is faithful to us. We get our power to live from that which we plug into, just like plugging an electrical cord into a wall socket. Taking a vow is that kind of definitive action, and the results we get are just as real. In our next video, we will read Chapter 7, The Vow of Obedience. See you then.